want to give you a little demo on how I actually paint an illuminated letter. Several months ago I began in my sketchbook, you can see junker pages here, all sorts of things. Several months ago I began making letters, drawing them and deciding and designing them to do an entire alphabet in gouache painting. You'll notice that in my notebook here I have set a definite boundary for each of the letters, so all of my 26 that I worked out over several months are in that same space. And the letter that I'm going to demonstrate on today is this letter A, so you'll see that in a few minutes. But all of them are going to have been moved now to watercolor paper. It's called hot press, means it's very smooth. And so the letter B is a good example. It's in a black and white line drawing that is on hot press paper, and this is ready to paint. I have done the other letters the same way. You can see there's a C, and they're not colored yet. I'm ready to do them, and each one is a little different. They're all in a very different times of history. People have done different kinds of illuminations and colors, and so that's what I've done. I thought I would show you some of the tools and materials that I used to create an illuminated letter. Obviously we need paint, color, and the paint that I use is called gouache. Gouache comes in a number of different colors. You can see I made a chart for myself of the colors that I have, and one of the things that's interesting that helps you see how gouache works, when you paint it on, it dries nicely, it doesn't smear. But if you get water on it after it's dried, it will do this, where you can see I accidentally dripped on this after I had painted this, and so now I have this smear. So gouache is a water-soluble paint, and it's different than transparent watercolor paint. Will let the light and the paper shine through, and you'll notice that these colors, it's a solid color. There's no luminosity to it in the sense of what transparent watercolor does. I squirt the tubes of the paint from the tubes into my palettes, and you'll see here I've got a number of different sizes and shapes, and I have squirted the paint into the well, and then I have used my brushes. I've dipped into water. You can see my water bowl here. I'll dip in and swish it and moisten it, and it's ready to paint with. So these have been out here. Some cases this paint's probably been here for several months if I haven't used very much of that color. They can reconstitute very easily with just the addition of water again. So it's really nice. It's an economical way to use paint. It doesn't get wasted just because it's been put out on the palette. It does dry, but you can re-moisten it. So I have color, and I have it here available. I have paintbrushes, and because of the kind of work I do, I have fairly small brushes. You'll notice these little fine tip, very small, very thin brushes, compared to large watercolor brushes, oil painting brushes. If I were to do a large painting on oil, a canvas, I might use a stiff brush, much stiffer. These are very soft and bendable, and do different things. There will be brushes that they're stiff and they carry the heavy body paint, but this watercolor, you want to use very fine brushes, and because the work is small, you need brushes with very few hairs. As I prepare a drawing, I will use a pencil and eraser, obviously, to begin my original sketch, and then I will trace it down using a tracing paper called Ceral. It's kind of like carbon paper for the old typewriters, but it's meant for art tracing and transfer. So my picture is now transferred, as I showed you earlier, in my notebook. It's from my notebook to the paper that I'm ready to paint on, and now I'm ready to begin I've transferred it by pencil. And then to get these black lines on my watercolor paper, I go over my pencil lines, or I use my light table with the drawing behind to let me see it through. And I use a German-made technical pencil. It's called a Koh-i-Noor, and you can see the very, very fine point on it, and it will make a very fine line. I'll take a scrap paper here, and you can see it makes a very even, it's called a monoline. It's just one width. It doesn't change and vary no matter what pressure you put on it. So you can make very fine lines, and the nice part, the ink that I'm using in this mechanical pencil is waterproof, so that my paint, when it bumps up against the outline, will not smear the ink. So as we get ready to do this particular letter, I'll show you what it's going to turn out like, and then the video will take you back and show you where I began and how it starts. And as I get close to the end, I'll show you that I use a red pen to add the dots around the letter. So here's our letter A. And this letter A has been completed. I've finished painting it. So we'll step by step through this, and we pick it up in the painting video where the main letter is painted in, and I will show you how I paint the knotwork and then lay in the background. Putting in the dots is just a matter of using my pencil and creating just a little design with my pencil, and then coming back with my micron pen and dotting along that line. And when they're completely dry, I take my eraser and clean up. When I begin painting cording or knotwork, I need to lay in a medium value, which means kind of the medium between the light and the dark of the color for the entire cord. After I've done that entire cord in a solid color, then I come back and begin to make shadows and highlights. I'm adding some shadow to my knotwork, and so any place where the knots go over or under one another, try to add shadows and or highlights depending on where they're at, and trying to make them look as if they were three-dimensional. So I'm going to do this guy's head here so the light is consistent. Maybe a little bit here underneath his beak. Put it around this side, because the other side I did it as if the light were coming from the left. Any place the knot is behind another part of the cord, then I put a little shadow in there, and even here where it's underneath, but the tip will get a little bit of white. And I'm also doing an edge as if the knot cord is kind of rounded. And so here in a moment I'll get my white revved up and ready to do a highlight color. And I'm going to use a much finer brush here. You can see the difference between the two. White. Yeah, you can barely see it there. So let's try that, see if that's going to do it. That's a little better. And I'm going to draw it up here wherever the light would hit it. It's still very, very subtle. So if I really want a strong highlight, I'm going to have nearly straight out of the tube white. It needs to be thin enough to manage, but another trick is to go ahead and lay another layer over it, but even that's a little wimpy. that's going to do it. Oh yeah, that's significantly better. Now I've got some white action here, and you can see I've given myself a little bit of a highlight along there. Here's a highlight. I'm going to put one on there, and maybe right up into there. I don't have to put a white on absolutely every bit of the length of this cord, but just enough to kind of make it pop. I'm going to make a pop right here. That piece. Whoa, I've got a little too much paint in there. There we go. And my white, and then need a little dab in here, not so much. A little right here. And of course a bunch right across here. This is a place where oh, I goofed there. I've got too much. I'll have to come back and wipe that out a little bit. Yeah, not good. And here, there, and I can see that I failed to get a shadow on that one right there. So let's do this around this curve, and right there. As I begin adding my background, you'll notice that I'm using a neutral color. This causes the colors in the design to do the starring role, and the background then doesn't try to take over. One of the things about gouache is that it hides things that you may have made mistakes on, or little smears. You can cover them up with this new layer of paint. But you do need to use an even amount of water compared to the amount of pigments, so that you don't end up with a blotchy looking background. It can become really uneven looking if you get careless about how much water compared to how much pigment in each brush load that you apply.